Those of you who know me know that I typically don't use a mic for these talkbacks, but this is an atypical show for us, as these subscribers who may have been with us for a while may know. I am Tanisha Dugan. I'm the producing associate here at TheaterWorks. I extend a very gracious welcome to all of you for this production of Next to Normal, and to our TheaterWorks Talkback Tuesday sessions. I know some of you come to these Tuesdays specifically to hang out with me and talk to the cast and talk about special themes to deepen our experience, but let's be honest, you probably had a deep experience tonight without my assistance, right? But we are so very lucky as one of our sponsors to have Hartford Healthcare Behavioral Health Network work with me. Those of you who do know me, since I took on these conversations, I love a curated conversation. I like to kind of come up with some themes that I think help us to understand a little deeper the things that are going on. And sitting seconds to my left, yes, I should know this, I'm doing a lot of teaching to my 2-year-old. Second to my left is Senior Vice President of Behavioral Health Network, Pat Rehmer, who along with her colleague Hank Schwartz really, helped about stigma in mental health. It's something that I think as you watch tonight's show, you may have trickled up inside of your brain. So that's the frame in which we're having our conversation tonight. To my immediate left is Kathleen Flaherty. She's the Executive Director of, say it properly for me,
Connecticut Legal Rights Project. Perfect.
And so they're going to help us, along with the cast, to sort of talk about that. In your programs tonight, because this is such a sensitive topic, and I want to make sure we honor all of you in the audience who are joining us today, in your programs are cards, yes?
No.
For you to sort of put your questions in there. So as we wait for the cast to come out, and I'll start some questions with Kathleen and Pat, I'll ask you to write your questions on the cards there, and then we've got our interns here in the back, raise your hands for our, who are going to come down and collect them. So actually, ladies, I can ask you guys to kind of hang out here in the aisles like our actors, and if you've got a question, fill them out, raise your card, the ladies will pick them up, and I'll ask the questions from there, okay? So the first thing, I think, is tell me a little bit about what each of you do in your organizations, and then we'll move from there.
I guess I'll start because you're staring at me.
And you've got the mic, great.
Connecticut Legal Rights Project is a legal services agency that represents low-income people with mental health conditions to protect their civil rights, whether it's regard to their treatment and recovery, their housing, education, or employment. And I lead the organization, but most importantly, for purposes of this play, I'm a person living in recovery from a diagnosis of bipolar disorder.
Joining us, J.D. Daw. And with that, Pat answer that question, I also want to send a hearty thank you to our friends at Facebook Live. This is one of the first times we've actually endeavored to have these conversations on Facebook Live. So you'll hear me repeat back the questions more often than I typically do. But what we want to make sure as partners with Hartford Healthcare Behavioral Health Network is that we can address as many comments and questions from you here in the audience tonight, as well as our friends at Facebook Live. So please excuse for those of you who are with me tonight the repetition of questions as we ask them. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Rehmer. As Tanisha said, I'm the president of the Behavioral Health Network at Hartford Healthcare. Prior to that, I was the commissioner of the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, so I've really run the gamut in terms of who I have dealt with. I'm a nurse by education and have been doing this work longer than I'm going to admit to any of you.
So one of the things, I sort of alluded to the topic of the night, right? Where's the casserole? Something that Pat taught me and Kathy reinforced in our conversations together is oftentimes you know exactly what to do when there's an illness that we feel comfortable talking about, right? If a family member is diagnosed with cancer, if someone has a baby, if if there's a heart attack, we know to come over with the casserole, to bring flowers, to write a card. We know to do that. It's almost reflexive. But if we find out that a friend, a family member, a neighbor is in the throes of a brain diagnosis, we don't do the same thing. We often don't do anything. And so that's really where we're coming from, is for the cast, so that you guys know where we're headed tonight. What is it about this show that made you, Pat particularly, but I think Kathy as well, go, yes, this is how we can begin to have that conversation?
So I'm gonna, the first thing I'm gonna say is that I actually don't talk a lot about stigma. I think stigma is what most people who have either a mental health diagnosis or substance use disorder diagnosis experience themselves. It's sort of the shame that comes along with it, which you portray beautifully. It's a little hard to even talk this close to the show. I really talk more about discrimination. So that's where it comes from. I'm a breast cancer survivor, right? I had major surgery in 2011. I was out of work. I got dinner brought to my house every single night for 6 weeks by friends at work. They just delivered it. My mother was there, more than willing to cook. It was nice that they brought dinner. But I can guarantee you that there's very few people that I've worked with or known who, when they go in for a hospitalization or they're in outpatient treatment, because most of these issues are chronic and recurring and relapsing issues, they're not talking about it because they're afraid of what others will think. And I think that just deepens the shame and how they feel.
What I love about this play, and that Christiane and David, you guys bring so vividly to the stage, is how that really causes your families to go inward. And Maya's character, Natalie, really is the first one in this world that we get to witness on stage that brings outsiders into this home space. I don't quite know what my question is in that, but I guess I'll pitch it to Maya. As you were looking at building Natalie, how did you sort of look at this idea of this boyfriend, this outsider coming into your world, and how did that affect how you crafted this character?
Kind of a tough question. I think Henry being in Natalie's life is so important because he's the one thing that's actually very happy in all of this. And so bringing that contrast, what I realized is bringing that contrast and connecting to that contrast as Natalie was kind of what created a lot of her resistance, I think, because it was something that she wants to have and wants to be, but didn't necessarily know how to do it with ease or welcome that into a world that she couldn't really handle on her own. So I think having the boyfriend there for Natalie just made her ask more questions about her life than she ever expected she needed to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to open up a little bit to some questions here. Ladies, do we have anything yet? Has anyone? And feel comfortable to continue to bring them to me as we go through. Yeah. Thank you. The first one, which I think is in some ways a spoiler, and it's always a hard question for any show that we do, but I'm going to pitch it anyway. Will Diane ever get better? And in some ways, I'm going to toss that to Pat and Kathy into what does that even mean, right?
No. I want you to answer.
No, she's wondering which line.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Short answer, yes. And actually, this is now the third time I've seen the show, the second here, because I was here last week. And the reason I frankly put myself through it again tonight, because that was not my original plan, was I thought I saw something when I watched it last week that I had missed the first time I saw it. And this play is actually a lot more subversive than you think it is. You think it's very much traditional medical model. Let's try the medication, let's try the ECT. But what healed you, what I worry about your character, is that you acknowledged the grief. You acknowledged the reality of that lived experience. And I'm not sure your character was quite there yet.
Not at all. For reasons of,
right.
Protecting and a lot about the reasons why he hasn't gone there himself. But now in Next to Normal 2, he has to go through some things.
But I was not positive I had seen that. And the thing that really made me a little hesitant at the beginning, and for a lot of people who live in recovery who challenge some of this more traditional medical model, there is this very big, oh, it's all about the medications, oh, it's the ECT that magically made you better. And no, it wasn't. It was, and if you actually really have a chance to listen to the lyrics are saying that too. So that's what I was most pleased about. And it is very possible to live in recovery after a diagnosis. And, as bad as things seem, because my husband's been where you were, signing the papers to have ECT done for me. That's why this play is really hard to watch. It's also like he's not here tonight.
I actually wanted to comment a little bit about bringing people inside the house, because the families often get so closed. I grew up in a house with an alcoholic. It's probably the first time I've said that out loud in a room this size, and it really, I so identified with your character, and everything has to be normal at home, and you have to be the A student, and you have to do everything 100% right, because nobody can see through that. That's really, and I think that's how most people experience this still. And that again gets back to, we don't talk about it. One of my favorite things is when Bluetooths came along. Because before that, if people were walking down the street in the town I lived in, talking to themselves, everybody would say to me, oh, there's one of yours. Now nobody says that.
Take some more. And this in some way, we kind of answered this a little bit, but I want to hear some more about why in this day and age with so many people being treated for different brain disorders is stigma still in existence.
You have to remember I'm a legal rights lawyer, and we fight to represent people to protect them from discrimination, which is unfortunately all too real. And we've had this conversation when we were preparing for this show. You will see people talk about people living with mental health conditions the way that it really, at least until November, was very unacceptable to talk about people of a different race, a different gender identity, a different religion. I'm not saying we're still in that same place, because we're seeing more of that happen. But the bottom line is, there's no other legally protected class where elected officials would convene a town hall forum to let people talk for 4 hours about how they don't want them living in their town. And until we change that, we're still having problems.
It's interesting, JD and I had the pleasure of sitting on a panel, and I think what was really eye-opening to us was that, this doctor said, you never say someone is cancer in the way that you say someone is bipolar, right? Both of these are diseases. And if we can even begin to make that kind of word shift, right? That you have this and you are not it incarnate, you can begin, in some ways, I think, to make those kinds of adjustments in your mind. Yeah.
I want to ask a question, because do you think it's because you can't see it? Because it's so not the same thing, but in our profession, if you injure your voice, because it's not a broken leg where, or a torn ligament where it's like black and blue, people, and you just go, oh, my voice, it's strained, and unless you go and actually get a picture of it and you show it to them. But if you just say, no, something is not right, then they're just like, suck it up, you know. But I wonder if the stigma has to do with, because it requires a huge amount of empathy, and because it's not something that we're experiencing, and it's not something that we can see. It is someone, do you think that has mostly something to do with it?
I think actually, probably, because I don't think that's actually true. There are some people that you can see because there are changes that occur over time, but there's a lot of people with substance use disorders that you absolutely can't tell, and I think that's true. I think part of the issue for me,
you can see the results of it, but you can't see the actual injury.
There are no lesions. There are no.
yeah.
Interesting.
I think part of the reason we're so happy about this particular play is because if you think about what's been portrayed, as you said, Cuckoo's Nest, I mean, even the movies that are coming out now that are about people with mental health issues, they're all killers and, you know, violent, and it's all very negatively portrayed. And so these kinds of opportunities to see it in a different light are really important.
I love that. I think that is something to highlight. The idea that most often when we talk about people with brain disorders, we immediately go to the ones with violent histories. And so I think that speaks to the stigma as well, because why would we want to come out and say a family member is suffering from something that we as a society has deemed a danger across the board, right? Yeah. And you know, when you think of protected classes, I bring it back because the closest thing I can associate it to is race, right? And so it is no longer acceptable to make the assumption that if you are a man with melanin, that you are dangerous. But it is acceptable to say that if you are a woman suffering with bipolar disorder, you are a danger. And I think us moving to a space where we don't make that automatic assumption is part of that too. What does Natalie's future have in store? Will she end up like her mother?
What do I think Natalie has in store? I think the way her mother releases her and actually gives her the answer she's been looking for leaves her more open to possibly having a freer life than her mother had, because she got the closure she needed. I always feel like hearing what happened to her brother is what she's wanted to know her whole life, and is what caused a lot of the issues between her and her parents. So getting that answer and then finally being able to see her father break down and support him and see how human he is, I think opens up her eyes a lot and gives her room to grow as a human and not just be stuck in her mother's fate, I'd say.
Because I always like to live on the edge, and an old part of me likes the sort of messiness of just asking a question. Are there questions out here that you just want to ask? You didn't articulate that on paper, but you want to ask. Yes, my friend here.
I kind of just have a question on that.
Mm-hmm.
How much of it, because she talks, her mother, Diane, talks about how her mother also had this instability. How much does that play into passing it down from generation?
The question is, how much does genetics have an effect on how this disorder is passed down?
What Dr. Fine says, I think, is the most poignant part of that, is that it can be genetically set, but it's triggered by something throughout your life. It's going to be some epics or epidemic of a brain thing. But what I think is interesting in those sort of situations using this relationship with Natalie and her mom and applying it to the regular world, is that normally that also gives the child the motivation to not be like their mother, or to not be like that figure in their life because of all of the grief and trauma and turmoil that they've had to deal with in the family, that not only is it a recognizable thing to say this could possibly be genetic, but also I want to do everything I can to remove the likelihood of this ever happening, and knowing the early onsets, knowing the warning signs, and being willing to seek help at that point, I think is the most intrinsic factor in that.
Pat, do you have anything else to add to that? One of the things that we've discovered, we've got two wonderful sponsors in this, the other one being Aetna, this idea of this first aid, right? This idea of first aid, and that there are things that we as members of society can recognize, almost like all of us know the signs of a heart attack, right? We're like, oh, shortness of breath, oh, profusely sweating. We know now's the time to call 911. The same thing with CPR. Are there first aid signs that we can sort of share with the folks here tonight?
First of all, that was a great answer, I just want to say, because I think there are protective factors and people have resiliency, but there are still some genetics that are associated with this. There are things like mental health first aid, which some advocates don't like, and I want to acknowledge that, but it really is an 8-hour course that people can take that helps you to recognize changes or somebody that might be in trouble. It was actually just developed first in Australia, and the intent was really more and the intent, I think, at the time was more around geriatrics, so that if you had somebody living next door to you that was older and they didn't come out for a couple days for mail, you might want to say something to somebody. And it is sort of like that. If you see something amiss, or you see someone behaving differently, it would be nice to either approach them and ask if they're all right, or if you're really concerned, maybe to ask a family member, but not to just ignore it, because it isn't always obvious. It's not a cast, but you know people and you know how they behave, so that's what I would say.
One more, and then we'll, right here.
First of all, thank you very much for such a wonderful show. It made tears, and I bet everybody have a little bit of that. And my question is about Dan. We could see the whole show, of course, Diane, but at the end, we could tell the doctor is telling Dan that he needs help, and he even refers somebody. So my question to you, Dan, is, were you all the time suffering so much, but you were the strength because you needed to be there for Diana, and now you are definitely down?
Yeah, part of the process with coming to this role and working with Rob, our director on it, was Dan's main goal, and for 16, 17 years, has been to protect his family, to guide his family, to uphold his family, and to keep their family happy or on track. Or from my analogy that I always use is like a boat, and he's the keel, wants to be the keel to the family, to the boat, and to stop it from toppling over. And so he's underwater trying to keep that. And being underwater, he has the potential of drowning himself, which all his emotions, Diana gets to have her emotions on her sleeve. When she's up, she's up, she's down, she's down. Dan is he has all those things going on, walking on eggshells, being happy that everything seems fine, everything's great, and then it's crashing down. I'm playing Dan, he wants to keep a lid on it all for what he thinks, for the safety of his family, or for the betterment of his family. But in doing that, he's sacrificing his own emotions and his own grief. He's never grieved the loss of his son because he was looking after his wife, and then they had the daughter, and then it was... So he's never gone through that process, and by the end of the show, Diana leaves and gives him that permission and opens that door for him. And he says early in one of the songs, he says, staying together from love or from fear. And he's staying in that marriage for both reasons. He's fearful of his life without Diana. He says that, I don't want to be alone. He's fearful of Diana if he leaves her. I'm sure there's been moments for him that he goes, I'm out of here. But for love for her, going, I can't leave her. What's going to happen to her? I need to be there for her. And I guess it's similar to if anyone's been caring or had cared for someone who's been terminally ill, and their life revolves around the care of that person. And when that person passes on, suddenly they have to deal with their emotions. They've got all this time in the world that they didn't have before because they were caring for somebody. now they have to face those emotions and that loneliness or the grief, and that's where he is at the end of the show. But luckily he has a daughter that's by his side. But yeah, he has to go through all those things he never went through 16, 17 years ago and onwards.
I want to thank this amazing cast for their work. Richard Dreyfuss was here. He shared something with me and with audiences when he was here about the communion of all of us being in the theater together, right? And in Latin, the word conspire means to breathe. And together you are all, with this audience, with these actors, conspiring in this space together. And I think in these times, however you feel about what's going on, the ability for us to have this sort of theatrical conspiracy together is fantastic. And so I'm excited to have you guys here. Great to have you.
He sat on a panel, and I'm going to tell that conversation that we had after the panel, because it had a whole lot of doctors and people, and a very impressive list, and he's very self-effacing, this lovely gentleman, and I think he said, I'd like to thank all these esteemed guests, and JD, he just sort of put him down at the bottom. And sort of picking up what you said, and with this piece more than anything, I mean, Lord knows actors we see in Hollywood and stuff, there's a lot of self-importance, sometimes, but what I did say is that without art, viewing it, experiencing it, we are the conduit to the conversation. And I've never been more aware of that than in this piece. And that, and not that all of a sudden I feel, oh, how noble am I, but it can be a room of doctors or lawyers or people that have ideas, and then they sort of just talk to each other. But without someone to be able to connect the clinical with everyone else, the conversation can't take place. And that's why I find this piece so extraordinary. So thank you for allowing that.
Thank you all. Get home safely. And we'll see you at the theater soon. Have a great evening.